All right, we're back for another video today. This time we have a Q&A that we're gonna do for you. So grab a drink, grab a snack, get comfortable in your bed or on your couch, and let's dive into it. Thanks for tuning back in. We are gonna do kind of a Q&A style video today, and we're gonna kind of cover a little bit about myself, my background, and then jump onto the car and just kind of go through it front to rear in its entirety, explain kind of how we got here, why we chose this chassis, things like that, and then plans for the future as well. All right, a little bit about myself. My name is Brian. If you're new here, I'm gonna give you a little bit about my background. So I started really getting into cars whenever I was young. You know, grew up, my family, we always went to car shows. My dad built custom cars for a living. So I've just kind of always been around it. It's kind of ingrained into my soul. Fast forward several years, I got my license, started hanging out with friends, and we really got into, you know, car culture and, you know, modifying our own cars, doing as much as we could with what we could afford, basically. So started with like a Jeep, bought that. That was my first car, and then kind of transitioned more into Mustangs, Audis, things like that. We eventually started going to car shows, kind of like Import Alliance type things and Stance Nation, all that stuff. Starting to see different builds, different states, you know, East Coast versus West Coast, how people did things differently. It kind of made me really want to start actually building something, not just like slapping wheels and tires and suspension on something, but actually building something. And that's kind of how we got to this thing here. This is the culmination of a lot of research, a lot of skills developed, and a lot of experience that I've developed over the last few years, last several years really. But this is kind of myself in a vehicle. So after discovering that college really wasn't for me and trade school was more of my lane, I decided to go to a local community college, take some welding classes. After completing that sort of course, I actually got a job in racing for a NASCAR team, Joe Gibbs Racing. So I was then a fabricator for them for around 3 years, did a lot of rear end suspension fabrication, a lot of exhaust fabrication. Since I was one of the youngest people there, a lot of grunt work as well. But that kind of ingrained the do it to the best of your ability culture that I know at the very moment. So growing up, my dad built hot rods, a lot of custom cars, a lot of things that were really different. Like we've owned roadsters, we've owned rat rods, we've owned really complete custom builds with nice, you know, SEMA style paint jobs, all things like that. Seeing all of those different avenues of how you can do a vehicle, realizing that you don't really have to be tied down to one style of car for your entire life, really just allowed me to enjoy building multiple different things. So I went from Subarus, Audis, Mustangs, Jeeps, to now working on off-road vehicles for a living, but then also wanting to build a road course style track car. I kind of have an appreciation for all of that stuff and not just cars, considering my day job is working on Toyotas and Lexuses. That kind of leads me to where I am now. After working in racing for so many years, I decided to go back to school, actually for more automotive based things, and it was for auto body and paint. And so I worked in that field for a while, but also just realized that yes, it's another skill set, another thing I can gain experience in, but just realized it wasn't really for me doing it in a production style environment. So decided it was time to take the leap and just start my own business. And that's been 4.5 years or so now that I've been doing that. And going back, I would have taken the leap much sooner if I'd have known where it would have landed me today. We are in Troutman, North Carolina. It's kind of Race City, USA. We have Mooresville to our south, Charlotte or even more south. And so a lot of racetracks in the area. VIR north about 1 hour and 45 minutes. We have Road Atlanta about 3.5 hours. We have Roebling Road about 2 hours from here. So we're kind of right smack in the middle of everything, which is great. But where are we physically right at this moment? We are in the shop. So this is where I run my business, Alpine Performance and Off-Road. And this is where my father-in-law actually owns the shop. He's owned it since 2014. This was a spot for me and my buddies to come hang out on weekends, work on our cars. Also like a personal shop for him up until recent, about 4 years ago, where it actually became where I run my business out of too. So this is practically where this car has lived its entire life since I've owned it, is right here in this shop. And everything that we've done to this car has been done in this shop. minus the roll cage that was done at the race shop. But yeah, so we can do about anything here. We have the alignment rack next door along with a tire machine and a balancer. We have fabrication area. We have a lathe. We have a CNC mill. We have drill presses, belt grinders, sheet metal brakes, anything that we would need to build a car, we can do it here. So yeah, this is where all the work has been done to this thing. And this is where you'll continue to see us film in the future. Moving on from myself, I hate talking about myself. We're gonna move on to the car. That's why most of you people are here, right? So the reason I chose a 240SX for a road course build, the first thing I would say is the wheelbase. So the wheelbase on these things is extremely short. My other options, back whenever I was making the decision on what vehicle I wanted to build, were an FDRX7, an S2000, things like that. Two-door coupe, I knew is what I wanted. FDRX7s were way too expensive. S2000s were also way too expensive. And most of the time, if you find a shell, it had a rebuilt title. And back when I bought the 240, you could actually find decently clean shells or running vehicles for fairly inexpensive, believe it or not. I bought this back in 2016, I believe it was, early 2016. And I bought the car running and driving from a guy in Indian Trail. It was close, it was cheap, it had a clean title, and it was running and driving. So I literally pulled it up onto the trailer and brought it back here for $1,000. Buying the car, I actually knew I was gonna be putting an LS into something. You know, kind of talking back to whether it was gonna be a S2000, FDRX7, or a S13. I had the engine and transmission first. I actually bought a 2001 Camaro. My brother-in-law and I drove to West Virginia to pick it up and drove it back on a trailer and pulled the engine and trans the next day. So originally the plan for the car was just to swap in an engine and trans, throw it on some suspension, wheels and tires, and drive it to shows. That changed. It kind of really changed. Like when I say changed, it changed drastically whenever we went to put the engine and trans in the car. My father-in-law being really heavily involved in NASCAR and being an amazing fabricator, he kind of saw me and my friends beating the transmission tunnel with a sledgehammer to make the T56 fit. And when he saw that, I came in the next day and the transmission tunnel and the firewall were practically cut out of it. So I didn't really have a choice, but going back, I would not change a thing, because now that it has its own custom firewall, custom basically bell housing tunnel, essentially is what we put in it. It makes for pulling the engine and the transmission out a lot easier and a lot quicker. So the next thing that contributed to the way the chassis is now was the roll cage. So after we swapped the engine and transmission in and we did the firewall and things like that, we also had already done a roll cage, and it went from recognizing that the engine was going to make a lot of power and then being in such a light car that just wanted it to be a lot more safe. At the beginning, it wasn't ever intended to be like a road course car build. It was just intended to be something where you can go rip a mountain road on a weekend with some buddies, but it changed and quickly developed into what it is now. The phase it is in right now is definitely much safer. It took a lot more time, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Okay, what challenges did we face doing an LS swap? Oh man, where to begin with this one? So as I already touched on, the bell housing not fitting in the transmission tunnel, that was definitely the first challenge that we faced. But then the next challenge was having to get a tire under the car that could actually handle grip on the road, because we're not building a drift car here. I never intended this to be a drift car like a lot of people do with S13 chassis. So I knew I had to go with a big tire that could handle the power. So we can touch on that other stuff in a little bit, but the next challenge was then stopping it. Brakes, being able to stop the car was also a very important aspect that should never be overlooked, honestly. Brakes should be done before power, before steering, before suspension, all that stuff. I'm a big advocate for having great brakes. Next aspect would probably be the exhaust. So considering the LS is a V8, you have 8 cylinders instead of 4, like what was in it originally. And so having 2 headers instead of just 1, that caused some problems. So we had to make a dual exhaust, and that took a little bit of time, just because with how low the car is to the ground, running 3-inch tubing all the way back through the car, basically underneath it, that presented its challenges with clearance to the road, essentially. We ended up going with a side exit exhaust that comes out through the flares. Definitely, that's probably my favorite feature of the car, honestly, is the side exit exhaust. Man, I think we worked on the exhaust for about 4 months, just trying to get everything completely perfect. One thing to touch on too, like if you're planning on swapping an LS into anything, it definitely is worth it to have a good swap kit. So yes, you could build all those engine pieces, like the engine mounts and custom pieces yourself, but getting stuff that's off the shelf, like from Sicki Manufacturing, they provided the engine mounts, the transmission mount, the drive shaft, wiring harness at the time that I ended up not using, but we'll get into that later. It made putting the engine in the engine bay super simple. Like I can pull this block out in about 2 minutes just because it's 2 bolts and then a transmission mount that hold it into the tunnel. That was worth every penny, just from a time perspective and even from a monetary perspective. For what you spent on it back in the day, it wasn't that expensive and it saved a whole bunch of headache. How are we going to fix the motor? Well, unfortunately, this engine, this block cannot be fixed. It is nothing more than a paperweight now, including those heads that are on top of it. The block on the driver's side has a gigantic hole in the side of it. It is nothing more than a paperweight. It is complete junk. So what are we going to do about it? So we currently have a 6-liter aluminum block being built by KM Engines in Iron Station, North Carolina. Ken is the one who built the original engine. Ken is also not to blame for why this engine blew up. This engine blew up because it was starved of oil, because these tires just create too much grip. And so what was happening is the oil was pooling in the cylinder heads. It wasn't making it down to the oil pan. The oil pickup tube started sucking up air, and then everything wasn't getting lubricated, and it pulled a bearing, and then it threw a rod. Pretty typical engine blow up, to be honest, but definitely this engine wasn't built for road course racing to the extreme capabilities that it can do now. So with the new engine being on the way, everything off of the old engine, like the intake manifold, the intake, the valve covers, coil packs, all of that stuff, the headers that you see here on the ground, all that stuff will still bolt right up just like it did on this engine here that's sitting inside of it. The reason we're going with another LS is because of that, because I don't want to have to start all over again. I don't want to have to worry about changing wire harness, changing engine mounts, transmission mount, all of that stuff. So the plan is we can't use this one. We have a new engine coming. It's being built by KM Engines in Iron Station, North Carolina. And it's going to make a little bit more power. We're going to have to do some other things, reinforce some things here and there, but it's going to be better in every which way, which we'll touch on in the future. Did I answer that one enough? Do I need to go again? So what inspired me to build this? I wouldn't say it was necessarily a build that inspired me to build something like this. It was more so working in NASCAR, getting all the fabrication experience that I gained while I was there, and just seeing how they do everything to perfection, to the best of their ability, because their cars are built to go 200 miles an hour, right? And they have to be safe whenever they do it. I more so got inspiration to build this from learning those skills and gaining that fabrication experience, and then being able to implement a lot of NASCAR techniques into this build, like making the roll cage and creating the brake brackets that we put on this thing that are the brake calipers we're running on this car literally from a NASCAR race car from like 2014. All of that's to come more in the future. We'll dive deeper into stuff like that, but that is what I would say inspired me for like all of like the meat and potatoes, the bones of the car. As far as like the exterior stuff and the wide body and things like that, just reading magazines growing up of like tuner culture and seeing some other people build some stuff. Sean Bassett's a good one with his Carbon 2, I think it's a 240Z. It's a Datsun. That thing was just incredible, and watching him build an entire tube chassis before I'd even started building this was really inspiring. But then present day, I would say Mike Burrows and Stance Works. You've got Riley Stair. You've got people like that who are actually building things. You know, that's really driven me to keep going and furthering the progress on this car as I get more time on the track and develop as a driver and more time in the shop as a builder as well. So that's it, guys, for this Q&A video. Thank you for tuning in. I know this was kind of just like an informative video for you, but hopefully you have a better understanding of what we do here, a little bit about me and my background, and kind of what we're gonna do in the future. This thing is an absolute animal on the track, and I cannot wait for you guys to see some laps once we get back to that point. We have a little bit of work to get done before we do that, though. So stay tuning in and watch out for videos coming in the future.